Most couples think their sex life is about sex, but it's not the whole story. Your sex life is a window into everything else that's happening in your relationship. The connection, the resentment, the power dynamics, all of these unspoken needs. It's where all of the invisible patterns show up in the most vulnerable space possible. When the sex stops or becomes obligatory, or one person is always the one initiating while the other is always deflecting, that's not typically a sex problem. That's your relationship trying to tell you something. And until you start to listen to what it's actually saying, no amount of date nights or lingerie is going to fix it. When one person initiates and the other consistently avoids, on the surface, maybe it seems like mismatched libidos. But what I've found in my 20 years of working with couples is that the person avoiding often feels overwhelmed by emotional demands outside of the bedroom. They're the ones managing everyone's needs, carrying the mental load, being the one who always has to show up. Now sex becomes one more thing someone wants from them, and they have nothing left to give. They're often tapped out, and to feel like sex is an obligation, well, it becomes very unsexy. And for the person initiating, it isn't just asking for sex. They're asking for connection, reassurance, proof that they're still wanted. They're trying to close the emotional distance through physical closeness. And when they get rejected repeatedly, it confirms their deepest fear. I'm not desirable, or I'm not enough. And so, what this dynamic is actually telling you is that there's an imbalance in emotional labor or unresolved resentment, maybe a breakdown in emotional safety. Once you really put some focus on those things, desire often returns. Sometimes the distance is more about how they've been hurt by criticism or feeling dismissed in other areas of the relationship. And now physical intimacy somehow feels unsafe. I mean, why would they want to be vulnerable with someone who makes them feel small or criticized? And so the need to grow emotional safety is the starting place to getting the intimacy back on track. In long term partnership, when sex becomes like a transaction or obligatory, you know the pattern. It's more like checking a box, and one person does it to keep the peace, and the other person feels that lack of enthusiasm but goes through it anyway because at least it's something. Well, this is certainly not a dance you want to get stuck in for too long. Often, it's what happens when the relationship has become functional. You're kind of roommates managing the logistics of life, not partners nurturing intimacy. Sex becomes something you're supposed to do instead of something you really want to do. So if you're stuck going through the motions in the relationship and that's showing up in the bedroom, know that likely the spark hasn't died. It just got buried under tasks, routines, and resentment. Speaking openly and honestly about this is an essential step, and the conversation needs to go beyond, we should have more sex. That doesn't address the real issue. The real questions are, what happened to that connection between us? Where did all this resentment come from? And what would need to shift for us to actually want each other again? Are we both willing to turn towards each other? Sometimes this conversation reignites something. It names what's been suffocating the intimacy, maybe an imbalance in the relationship, maybe it's unresolved conflict, maybe it's a feeling of being taken for granted. And once it's named, you can actually address it so that desire can return when the conditions for it are restored. And sometimes the conversation reveals that one or both of you has already checked out, that the obligatory sex was just a way to avoid facing the truth that the relationship feels over emotionally. And as painful as that is, knowing is better than pretending. Another dynamic I've observed in my practice is one where one person uses sex to reconnect after a fight. After conflict, One person wants physical closeness as a way to repair, and the other still feels hurt. The issue doesn't feel settled. The physical first person learned that connection happens through touch. Maybe that's how their family made up and how they learned loved works. But the emotional first person needs words, apology, acknowledgement, understanding before they can be physically close again. So neither approach is wrong, but when they collide, one person feels rejected and the other person feels pressured. You always want to just move on without actually talking about it, and that tends to build up. And what about when the sex is great, but everything else is a mess? I remember one couple explaining their dynamic. We have amazing chemistry, the sex is incredible, but we fight constantly. We don't really share the same interests or values. We can't talk about anything without it turning into a blow up. This pattern often shows up in a relationship that's creating an unstable attachment from childhood. The highs are really high and the lows are really low, and that intensity can feel like love. Often it means the physical connection is masking the lack of emotional foundation. Great sex can't fix a broken relationship, but it can keep you in one far longer than it should be. It can be really challenging when sex completely stops. No intimacy, you've become roommates. This isn't just about being too busy or too tired. That's a symptom. The real issue is that somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing each other as a partner and started seeing each other as some kind of responsibility. Often this happens maybe after having kids or during periods of high stress or after repeated hurts that never got repaired. Resentment builds a wall, and on the other side of that wall, desire can be really hard to stoke. You can't want someone you're angry at, you're filled with resentment with. You can't be vulnerable with someone where the trust has been broken. So that emotional disconnection is so deep that neither of you feel safe enough to bridge it. You've stopped trying because you've been hurt too many times. This is the relationship's way of saying, we need serious repair work, or we're headed toward the end. Here's what most people miss. The sex problem is never just about the sex. It's about how safe you feel being vulnerable. It's about whether your needs are getting dismissed or honored. It's about resentment that's been left to fester and build. It's really about whether you are feeling seen in the relationship or feeling taken for granted. It's about all the ways you've hurt each other and never fully repaired. What I've found over the years of supporting clients is that when you start to address those issues, desire comes back all on its own. Not because you forced it, but because the conditions for intimacy are present again. So if your sex life isn't what you want it to be, stop treating it like the problem. Start asking what it's trying to show you about the relationship underneath. The answers won't always be comfortable, but they'll be true. And truth is what you need if you're going to decide whether to repair this relationship or release it. This channel is all about understanding the messages underneath the issues so you know what you're really fighting about, what's really going on. For weekly insights on building connection even through conflict, even when intimacy is missing, join my Sunday Relationship Tips newsletter. You'll find the link in the description. If you found this video helpful, join me. Subscribe for more videos. I create them to provide clarity inside of your loving connections.